New funding assessment guidelines in the Ontario Autism Program have local parents and behavioral therapists worried that kids may not receive the support they need. According to a government report released in early January, funding for the care and therapy of children who are living on the autism spectrum will be distributed by independent intake organizations. And according to an emailed statement from the Ministry of Children, Community, and Social Services, these organizations will, quote, determine each child's profile of support need, managing the dispute resolution process, and establishing coordinated and integral regional service networks across the province, in addition to many other roles, unquote. Amanda Besarowicz is the founder and director of IBI Behavioral Services in Barrie, and her practice uses therapy to help kids living on all areas of the autism spectrum. She says the current funding system is unclear, and it could mean some of the families she works with lose funding altogether or have it drastically reduced. Specifically, she worries that if people twice a year, they may not accurately gauge what care the child needs. This could mean that their families won't get the funding to afford care, especially if clinically trained professionals aren't the ones making the call on what level of funding each family gets. Services like IBI therapy, speech therapy, and more cost thousands of dollars a month. And for some kids on the autism spectrum, having access to these services is necessary in so many areas of their lives, from play to communicating with others to learning and more. Here's my conversation with Besarowicz and three people whose families rely on Ontario Autism Program funding. For some, they're worried that changes to the funding system could result in drastic changes to their kids' lives and their own. You kind of just introduce yourself, introduce your family, and kind of your history of interaction with the Ontario Autism Program and its funding.
Yeah, so I'm Amanda Besarowicz, and I am the owner of IBI Behavioral Services here in Barrie, and we are a full-service autism treatment facility that's serving autism spectrum from 18 months to 18 years old, and families are able to access occupational therapy, speech therapy, group skills, social skills, and ABA one-to-one sessions. We have quite a wide range of services when it comes to each child's needs and sort of what they're looking for, and then work really strongly around an interdisciplinary focus with respect to our various disciplinaries. And I am sort of the office lady behind all the work that goes on in there, the coordinating of services, connecting with the appropriate professionals, and running and directing the agency day to day.
My name's Wayne Desarmo. My son's Gabriel Desarmo. He was diagnosed just before 2, I think it was, and about 3 years ago. And we have a different situation than most because we're Native. So we get Native funding for a lot of our IBI services, which is really awesome that we get that, because we wouldn't be able to get a third of what we get now, even from what we do get with the government money that we would have seen probably this year after applying for it. So I know with the Native funding, we had funding within about 48 hours after applying with Jordan's Principle, I think it's called. A foundation that's federal, that one of the Native kids didn't get funding in time and ended up dying, and they brought this weave through the red tape of all of that, trying to get funding and everything. So it's been really, really helpful with us in that aspect, because I think we only get about 40 grand, I think it was, from the Ontario government, and Gabriel's funding's like 120 grand a year, which is more than me and my wife make together.
My name is Noor. I have 3 kids, but my youngest one, John, he is 5-year-old. He was diagnosed with autism when he was 18 months old. And since then, we applied for him. At that time, there was the old program, and in 2017. So he was on waiting list since then until 2019, when the system was changed. So we put him in IBI with Amanda in 2018, and since then we were trying to pay whatever we can. We couldn't afford more than 1 day a week, so that's what we were doing until 2019. And then we were told before they made the changes that he is almost there to receive his need-based funding, but then the program changed. Then we were back on waiting list, and until I think July 2019, we were paying from our own pocket. And then 2019, we received his childhood budget check for $20,000. But that was not enough. Like for that, we only were able to get like 7 hours a week. Plus, he was nonverbal, completely nonverbal at that time. So we were paying for his speech for one time a week for that. And that was gone spoof like within a few months. And from then on, then obviously COVID happened and it was closed for a few months. Then John is back from September, I believe. Again from our own pocket, 1 day a week, and we are still waiting.
So my situation would be similar to Noor's. So I have a 6-year-old son who was diagnosed when he was 2.5, so 3 years since his diagnosis. And again, there was the OAP program. I mean, we've seen it change, I think now almost 4 years. So again, similar to Noor, we were put on a wait list for services. Then they changed the program. He was still waitlisted. So we again, July 2019, we were issued a childhood budget, which was, I guess, a program they've implemented to kind of bridge the old program to what they're proposing now. So we paid out of pocket for just over 3 years for our son to receive his services, which was hard, obviously. So now, we've always maintained the same number of hours since he started. He's been with IBI Behavioral Services with Amanda as well since March 2017. And yeah, that's basically the same things that went through the same motions as Noor over the last 4 years now.
I guess for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people, they aren't really familiar with the Ontario Autism Funding program, whereas it seems like you and your families are probably very familiar with how it works and have navigated all the systems and paperwork. I was wondering, maybe Amanda, could you give a kind of a brief overview of the Ontario Autism kind of funding system, just as some groundwork for the discussion moving forward?
Yeah, so I'll take you sort of back to what Kat is referencing in terms of the last 4 years and the government changes. So in 2016, we were under the Wynne government, where they implemented what they called the 8K, 10K program. So the government issued every family on the wait list at that point in 2016, 8K or 10K checks. With the 8K, the families could turn around and purchase whatever they wanted. There was actually no restrictions or limitations in place initially under that program. So as you can imagine, families were spending it on many things outside of therapy. And then you had your families that were scrounging everything in a book down to the last penny to access therapy. So you had these families that were kind of like, oh, I've got 8K from the government. This is great. And then you've got families that are like, I've got 8K. I have to stretch it. I have to make it work. After that 8K, they started issuing out 10K budgets. So $10,000 every 3 months or so that you could actually reconcile it. Measures. So it had to be clinical recommendations. It had to be signed invoices. There had to be ABA-based services. So they sort of tightened their constraints around the program at that time. From government changeover happened, we went over to the PC government. Under the PC government, they again revised the program and called this the OAP, the Ontario Autism Program Childhood Budget Program. So every child was then able to submit a behavior plan, a clinical attestation, and a budget form. A budget form based on need. So our psychologists and team of BCBAs would assess what that child needed in terms of services. We had some kids that really only needed 8 hours a week of group skills, so that's what they were funded for. We had kids that needed 40 hours a week of intensive one-on-one treatment, along with interdisciplinary services like OT and speech, and they were then able to access that as well within their budget. And this program sort of kept on moving, but then everything came to a halt when families really started digging and saying, why have I not gotten my funding yet? Where's my number in the queue? And then we were always told as providers, as parents, they would get a number in a waitlist system. You're number 79, you're number 3, you're number 2. Oh, your number's coming up. Start thinking of your options. So the program really sort of started to shift and morph into something new, but they froze that funding pocket. And they actually tried in 2018, I want to say, or 19, to cut every kid off. They were like, nope, we're coming in strong. We're cutting everybody off. Everybody's going to go to a 5K budget or a 20K budget. Parents marched at Queen's Park. They protested. They rallied the changes. And the government then extended what we will call the old legacy program. It was then extended at that point. However, it left parents, like the parents on our screen, in limbo without having access to needs-based therapy. So in examples of Nora talking, like she would get a $20,000 check, but if you think about $20,000, some parents are like, parents that didn't understand it were like, you got $20,000, like stop, that's enough money. What do you mean? You need money? And the outsiders looking in were like, the government's giving you money, you should be happy. But when you really break down the cost of services and the cost of intense services, interdisciplinary services, a psychologist on your team, it's $20,000 is such a small splash in the pan, really. Like, and just like Kat had said, she paid for everything, maintained her son's hours out of pocket. So truly, how fast 20K can go. Now they've issued out these childhood budgets for the last year or so families have sort of just sat back and waited. We've also been experiencing the pandemic, which hasn't helped people being able to really get their voice heard because of all the other stresses in the world. What parent wants to sit and also add the stress of autism and fighting on their plate, because it's been a long fight and parents have stood their ground long enough. So now we're hearing about this new needs-based program. Sorry, let me back up. Parents were promised a needs-based program. Now we're rolling into this determination of needs program, and particularly like we had alluded to in subsection 4.2 in the article that was issued out, there's huge concern with the new needs-based program. So it's not going to be needs-based based on what the child clinically requires. It's actually a determination of needs based on an independent intake organization who is employed by the ministry that is responsible for the funding being funneled out. So we're not talking about professionals in the field in terms of psychologists, BCBAs, doctors that truly know the actual clinical requirements. We're talking about care coordinators dispersing these hours and funding to these children based on what they see fit. And in the entire dedications of these individuals that are going to be making these calls, going to a benchmark program and benchmarking kids and doing a 1-year check-in. Well, now we're got to look at this because we're sliding all the way back to the McGuinty government and the early win government model. So when the former model was in place of benchmarks, which it looks like they're trying to reintroduce at this point, it's concerning because that was put in place as more of a cost-saving measure at the point, but wasn't effective clinically, and it left a ton of kids without service. So it's almost like we're going back to a model that has already proven to not be effective. And I think it's extremely disheartening because families were promised needs-based therapy. That's all we've been hearing is needs-based therapy. So the fact that we're going to an independent intake organization that can say, all right, Katerina, your kid, well, you know what? He walks, he talks, he's pretty good. He's going to get 7 hours. Nor your guy, well, he might need a little bit more help with play, but he's going to get 3 hours. And you're like, but wait, why am I getting 3 and she's getting 7 based on need? There's no streamlining. It doesn't look. They're talking about putting protocols and assessments in place. But again, like it's really, parents are left in the dark again regarding what this program actually means.
Okay,
and I'll start with you, Katerina. What would this actually look like in your life and in your kid's life? How would it affect you to have this kind of reversion of how the funding's allocated?
Well, like Amanda said, I just wanted to just kind of expand on a thought she had about these care coordinators. They're also going to be seeing our children, like they're going to be one person who assesses what our child is going to be entitled to for a year on one day of their entire life, right? So if my son's having a good day, because after 4 years of investing in therapy, the majority out of our own pockets, he might have a really good day in that assessment center. So he might not come off as someone who's going to need a lot of services. So what that's going to look like, let's say for my future, or what it's already looked like for me in the last 4 years, there's been a lot of sacrifices and changes in our lives. So financially, this had a huge financial impact on mine and my husband's family and life. Into too much detail, we moved and were able to take out, money out of our home, like equity out of our home. Our mentality was, I have my whole life to pay off my mortgage. I'm not going to have my whole life to invest in my son's development at an early age. 4 years ago, I dropped down to working part-time at my job. I have an amazing job that has allowed me to do that. And I know that the majority of the population and parents would not be able to have that with their employers. Most families have had to have one of the caregivers leave their occupation to be able to juggle that treatment. So running, at first my son was going 2 to 3 days a week to therapy. Well, it's an 8 o'clock drop off. I have an hour commute to work. So how am I going to get him there to the clinic at 8 when I start work at 8, an hour away from here, right? So it's running him to and from appointments, whether it's, IBI therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, managing all of those appointments, those invoices, reconciling those invoices, so on and so forth. I feel like I'm my 6-year-old son's secretary, his assistant, his personal assistant, managing just his life, his schedule, his appointments, the finances that we get for him. As a predominantly 2-income working family, my husband and I make a decent income above the threshold of any other services that are out there to assist us, which is frustrating because our child is no different than someone else's child who maybe, doesn't make as much money as we do, or for families who make more money than we do, right? Our children all need the same amount of money for the same need. And as a family, who have good jobs, I feel like we're penalized for that and have to then try so much harder to make that work and juggle our jobs with less resources and less money coming to us to make that work. So I'm currently on maternity leave. But when I return to work, I'm still going to be going back to work part-time, which I have to apply for as a compassionate accommodation year by year to accommodate my son's needs, his schedule. He misses school 1 to 2 days a week in order to attend all these therapies for his betterment, because the schools lack those supports and services for a student and for the children. So, and obviously just the mental stress, mental health as a parent, for your child, providing, care now for my new child, being a good wife, a good mom, a good housekeeper on my days off, a good friend, a member of society. Like those things suffer and take a toll on you when you're so focused and trying so hard to do what's best for your child.
And so it seems like you have you and your family have like a system in place that's working
Yes.
now, but if the funding changes, you might have to completely rethink a lot of these choices. Is that right?
Absolutely. I was working a part-time job on top of my regular job for a bit there to help with my son's therapy costs. My mom was helping out. She was working part-time and helping us with his therapy costs when, we were told initially with the first program that it was about a 12 to 18 month wait for services. So we calculated and budgeted 12 to 18 months of me being off work part-time, how much money we were going to need to provide him with those services for the year to 18 months, and then go from there. Well, 18 month came and went, and it's still another 12 to 18 month wait for services. So then what? You've run out of money. I still have a job that I, have to continue then to work part-time at, which is a huge pay cut, half the hours, half the money coming in. It was a huge, financial stressor. So if we don't continue to receive the minimal funding that we've gotten from the government, we don't know what we'll do. I mean, my husband and I have both advocated with our organizations with recent contract negotiations to have some additional benefits covered. So, we have some additional psychology coverage and additional occupational therapy coverage that was implemented this year, but it is still so minute in comparison to what these children truly need. When you're paying over $100 for 45 minutes for occupational therapy weekly for an hour, it's a lot of money a month. And that's just occupational therapy, right? On top of ABA therapy, speech therapy, physiotherapy of children who need it. That money adds up, and, I don't know what sort of jobs and people would have here to maybe be able to afford those kind of services. It's, I don't know. My son we would likely not be able to afford it moving forward to keep him in everything that he's doing at this point. Because we've exhausted all our financial resources at this point for him.
I was wondering, Noor, could you go next? And I was wondering, you identify with some aspects of Katerina's story, or how does the funding change? How might that affect you and your family? I think you're on mute there. Oh yeah, no worries.
Okay. Yeah, my son was running around, so I muted myself. Okay, so I said this almost the same situation we had at our house. I was on parenting leave at that time when John started showing the signs. And after that, I didn't go back to work. At that time, it seems like a best decision. But when he was diagnosed, and after that, like my husband is the only one who is working right now. So paying mortgage, and then we have 2 other children and other expenses. It was pretty hard to pay more than 1 day a week. So that's what we were doing since 2018. I tried to go back to work in between to fund my son's therapy, but we live in Bedford, so kind of a small town, and the daycares we have here available, they told me that they have to wait for more than a year, I think, to get extra help for him, because he is a child with special needs. So it was not a good decision, because I work in finance and I had to go in. I was not able to find something which I can work from home. So then again, we stick with 1 day a week. He was told that he was recommended that at least he should do 15 hours a week. 15 hours a week by the clinician who did his autism. And until now, like he will be 6 in August, he was not able to get 15 hours a week. So that is kind of very heartbreaking for us, because experts have, and the research has proven that the best time to get the ABA therapy and it's an early intervention is between as early as before 6 years. That works the best. But that didn't happen. And as Amanda was mentioning, we were promised to get the need-based therapy in April 2020, which didn't happen. And then next time we were told, okay, it will be April 2021, and that didn't happen again. So we don't know when will that happen, and if and when it will happen. I really want him to have like good hours for his therapy, so he can get advantage of the situation as much as he can. Until now, like, we almost exhausted our resources. We were using our credit lines to pay for his therapies. He was nonverbal, completely nonverbal when he joined IBI, and I think it was it's almost 2 years now. With the speech and everything, he is partially verbal now. So I just wonder, if he gets all the need-based situation, then he will do wonders. And yeah, that's all, I guess.
Oh no, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I was wondering, Wayne, could you go next? I'm not sure if your child is affected by this funding change, or even if not, how this kind of funding model impacts your kid's life.
It's not I guess he's not affected like the other two are in that aspect because of the native funding, which has been a godsend for us. Because, like I said, we wouldn't be able to afford anything. We didn't have savings. We had $5,000 limit on my credit card, so I could get him a month of what they recommended, maybe on that. But yeah, it's the new funding and the way it keeps changing. I see everybody at the centers and how it affects the people wishing they could get the 15 hours, and they can't. They can get an hour, and that's all they can get. But even an hour is better than nothing, because I see what happens with my son and getting full funding. And the way he was when we started, he would bounce in a chair and stare at the ceiling. Like that was my son. No talking, no nothing. And now he's communicating with us. He's telling us what he wants. I want milk. And like, I never thought that would happen. And with this funding, it's changed his life. And I'm making him more part of society and a person in there, which we knew he was in there. It's just he couldn't express it. He couldn't get it out. He'd just get frustrated and scream. And now he's starting to break down into words what he wants and how he wants it. And it's amazing how much month by month they change. And they revert back sometimes, and then they come forward again, and they do so much. And like I said, I don't know where we'd be without the funding that we do get.
The way that it's affected your kid's life has been pretty like foundational, like been a super integral part of him developing as a kid. Have you found that as well, Noor and Katrina?
It made a huge difference. If I look back 2 years ago, there's a huge difference with John. And I'm very grateful to Amanda. She was very helpful during the whole time, very accommodated. There were some times when we were not able to pay on time, but she accommodated us for that. So I am really grateful for that. And like from completely nonverbal to now, like he is very spontaneous with his requesting. Without any prompt, he requests what he needs. We just recently started his toilet training program, and he's doing pretty good about it. And seriously, to be honest, when he at that time when he was diagnosed, there was no eye contact, nothing, no words from then to now. I couldn't have imagined it. Like it was a roller coaster, but I just hope that it just makes me wonder that if for that little much of therapy he can do that much, then what would have happened if he was getting the need-based therapy? So yeah, but it's an amazing journey. We all in this together. I decided to go back to school to study behavior sciences, so I can help my son whatever I can until something happens from the government.
Okay. Have you found the same, Katrina? Like has it really? Can you notice a really big change in your child when they have that regular therapy?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. He was diagnosed at 2.5, so developmentally, there's certain things that you don't really realize at that point in their lives. So to say, I have no idea what he'd be like right now without the therapy. However, I often, from family, friends who, know of his diagnosis or don't know of his diagnosis, I often hear, well, I would never know that he has autism. I can't tell. And, the popular misconception is that autistic individuals have this look. Yeah, I parted his hair different today. That's why you can't tell. Right. Like, so, but I mean, in all seriousness, when they can't tell based on their social interaction with him, that's a compliment, because it means that, his development is so far, very close to a neurotypical developing child. His social skill was a big thing that he was struggling with, at that age, and developmentally he's grown. And, even things like his fine motor skills, his attention, his focus, those sort of things, now that he's in school, he's able to be in a regular classroom with very minimal support outside of the class or within the class to help him with those needs. So absolutely, 4 years of therapy in all these areas has, brought us to him being able to now in grade 1, what is of now our school year, being able to be in a classroom with very minimal supports, and no modification to his education, to the things he's expected to learn with the rest of his peers. And, you know, we've learned that within our home, there's certain things that we can and can't do to assist with his needs. You know, a lot of, you know, sensory equipment that helps him get through the day, get through transitions, get through routines, and, you know, managing behaviors accordingly. We wouldn't have been able to, you know, go get through a day with some of those behaviors if we had not learned more about him, for him to have been in these therapies to help him cope, and then for us to being able to manage that as well. So absolutely. Like,
if you could talk to the Premier, talk to the bodies that are making these decisions, what would you want them to know? What would be a better way of determining the funding that families get?
Yeah, so actually, over 2 years ago, March 2 years ago, actually I had Premier Doug Ford in my clinics. He actually came up in person to actually see the work that was being done in there. And he was faced head on with full tantrums. He saw sensory tables flipped. So he saw firsthand the effects of what happens to these kids, right? So we're talking at that time, the kids often put them back in, take them out of treatment and put them in the school system. He really got a firsthand look at that. And I think that, first of all, spoke to our Premier overall, which then led to the overturn of the decisions and the switch of ministers on the file. If I could speak, I would say reevaluate the plan. Give the parents what you said you were going to give them. Follow up, you know, with respect to Minister Todd Smith. He promised a needs-based therapy. He promised a needs-based program. He spoke to parents in and out saying that this is going to be rolled out from a needs-based program. Exactly like Kat said, you know, you're going to have somebody see your child once in their lives and then determine their need. And then this person who doesn't have any interactions or clinical expertise with your child in a supervisory role is going to then benchmark your child and tell your child how much longer they have in therapy. So I would beg and barter that, you know what, these legacy kids that are holding on to all this funding, it starts to fade out and be stretched out to all the other people that genuinely have been sitting there praying, begging for this therapy to come their way to help their child, right? You know, after they use up their 20K budgets, they're dropped to 5K. 5K will get you nowhere in this world right now. There's one-time interim funding where parents can say, like, here, you want $20,000, I'll dangle a carrot. Here's your $20,000, but it's one time. That's it. So there's different little things happening behind the scenes that I don't think parents are fully aware of. But my plea would be to issue a needs-based program, and issue a needs-based program that is clinically appropriate and with the proper clinical input from the proper ABA behavior-based, evidence-based trained clinicians versus care coordinators that work for the ministry. I have to really decipher where their true intent is coming from. Is that coming from best interest of the child or the best interest of the ministry's pocketbook?
Thank you so much, all of you. I really appreciate it. And I wish I could speak with you longer, but this meeting will, I think, time out in a couple minutes here. And once again, I just really appreciated your stories and sharing your experience.